Welcome to the post-lunch session. Uh, the chair of this session will be Dr. Sunil Shah, and the speaker is Professor Sachin Ketkar. Professor Sachin Ketkar is a bilingual writer, translator, and academician. His poetry collections are Skin, Spam, and Other Fake Encounters, Selected Marathi Poems Translation, and other one is A Dust for the Dead Dog and Other Incantations. He won Indian Literature Poetry Translation Prize for translation of Gujarati poetry in the year 2000, given by Indian Literature Journal, Sahitya Akademi, and Lokanet Rajaram Bapu Patil, Maharashtra Dalit Kala Academy. His forthcoming books are A Critical History of Marathi Literature and Dilip Chitre, Makers of Indian Literature. His title of today's paper is Comparative Indian Literatures, Translations and Ethics of Additive Bilingualism. So I would like to invite Professor Sachin Ketkar on the dais.
Sir is already here. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. And to add to the introduction, I would like to tell you that Professor Ketkar is also alumni of Department of English Linguistic. And without wasting much time, I hand over the session to him. Sir.
Good afternoon. Uh, it's my pleasure and privilege to be here. Uh, this is the place from where I did my doctoral research, and I will be talking about my doctoral research today. But because I'm in the very place where I have done. I also did my bachelor's from Valsad, from VNSTU University. So my connection to VNSTU goes back a long way. And that's the reason why I want to thank the organizers of this seminar, especially Professor Mahesh Dey, uh, who invited me here very kindly to share my views about multilingualism and Bharatiya Bhasha Pariwar. And luckily, there were two more learned speakers who spoke about Bharatiya Bhasha Pariwar framework and the questions of history of multilingualism as well. So I have decided to take a different route. I want to talk about the concrete experiences of multilingualism, which I have gone through. So at the risk of sounding as if I'm showing off, that's not the intention of my discussion today. And though I'm going to talk about myself, which is utterly boring thing to do, especially in post-lunch session, where it's always a challenge to keep awake. But I always insist that people who are feeling sleepy can feel free to do so. It's our fundamental right enshrined in the Constitution of India. Uh, so let me go over immediately without spending much time what I intend to do today. So what I want to do today is to give a very concise overview of my life as a creative writer, translator, researcher in comparative Indian literatures, working with Marathi, Gujarati, and English, these three languages, not with the intention of self-promotion, but as an illustrative case of how multilingual situations is a default situation that a writer in India, not a very great one like me, has to face. Uh, but in doing so, the real intention behind it is to examine the underlying historical, ethical, and cultural context of my works and my personal location in terms of post-colonial and post-global predicament uh, produced by the history, something that we touched upon in Professor Bhattacharya's presentation, but in terms of cultural crisis, whose only two symptoms I will just touch upon. One is what is known as subtractive bilingualism, as promoted, as theorized by a very famous sociolinguist, almost somebody who is called father of sociolinguists, Walter Lambert, Wallace Lambert, And Braj Kachru, a very famous student of researcher in English as an international phenomenon, he terms it as linguistic schizophrenia. So what do these two terms mean is what I will be talking about. I will also talk about how I use comparative Indian literature as a framework to do my research and inflict it upon others who are doing research with me, and why I do so, and what are the reasons. And this framework is developed by very well-known scholars of comparative literature, namely Shishir Kumar Das and Amiya Dev. And if time permits, then I will speak about my current project, that is the critical history of Marathi literature. So as I have been introduced, I am a creative writer. So I write in Marathi. My I write mostly in Marathi. Create my poetry is in Marathi, and I also write criticism in Marathi. I am also a translator who works from Gujarati Marathi into English and also the other way around. I translate from English to Marathi as well. So, as a Marathi speaking creative writer who is born and brought up in Gujarat, who has studied in English as a medium of instruction, and who has studied what is called, into inverted commas, English literature, and who is also paid for teaching it. I have always been a translator in some form or the other. So if I have to teach Jane Austen, I am translating because that's the social cultural context which most of the Indians would not be very familiar with. So my parents are from Maharashtra and they moved to small coastal town of Valsad in 1960. And I was born and brought up in Gujarat. Most of my education has been through English. So multilinguality is not a theoretical phenomenon so much for me as it is a lived problem rather, or a question which I keep on asking myself, and most of my research circulates around this question of multilinguality, which is a banal reality for Indians. So when you go to canteen and use 3 languages in a single sentence to order something, it's a default way of living and communicating in India. It's not a theoretical, abstract theoretical issue that we are dealing with here. So the language which I speak at home is Marathi, and outside home it's mostly Gujarati, right from the beginning. Or rather, it was some variety of Marathi, which people called, into inverted commas, standard Marathi, which is actually a dialect spoken in Mumbai and Pune. So what is the difference between a dialect and a language is a question that we have to deal with it if you are an Indian. And the Gujarati that I grew up with was Surti Gujarati. And the English that I picked up was a kind of English that you would pick up from a small town English medium school where there would be more Gujarati than English in the school. And I'm sure many of you must have seen this. And we used to joke that I'm from English medium school, which means medium. It's not very good. It's not so bad as well, but medium. Medium spicy as well. So actually, I have been living on the boundaries of geographical, social, and cultural spaces of Gujarat, Maharashtra, and probably India as well. And though often thought to be similar, for example, as Bhagini Bhashas, Gujarati and Marathi societies are exceptionally divergent historically, not just in terms of language and geography, but also in terms of class, caste, and gender equations. So, if somebody says that Indian language framework, I am worried because I live with 2 languages and nothing can be more different than Gujarati cultural history and Marathi cultural history. Though they are adjacent languages, they are from the same, probably same upbranch source, both of these languages. But they are so different. And if you are a translator, then you have to live with the fact that no 2 languages in India are the same. So this experience of living on the boundaries and belonging nowhere actually is reflected in my collections of poetry. One is Jarasandaच्या ब्लॉगवरचे काही अंश and other is भिंतीशिवायच्या खिडकीतून डोकावताना. I started writing poetry at the age of 13 or 14 in English to start with, of all things. When I fell in love with English poetry, something that I have not yet overcome, it's a love still persists, but I make it a point not to teach it, though sometimes it's given to me. You can't teach things that you love, right? It was Blake and the Romantics to start with, and then it was Lewis Carroll, Jerome K. Jerome, Eliot, Wallace Stevens in my 11th and 12th standard books, textbooks. Since then, I have been reading and studying world literature in English extensively and even teaching it till today. When I was doing my bachelor's from Valsad, I remember translating Soliloquies from Macbeth and some lines from Sri Aurobindo's Savitri into Hindi of all languages, which I have never studied, which is not part of the space in which I am growing up. But it came to me through educational system. And because I was young, I was foolish enough to do such things. When you are young, you are audacious and people forgive you for your stupidity. I would not even dream of touching Aurobindo and leave alone translating it into Hindi at this age. So when I showed some of my translation to Professor Ganesh Devi, who was, apart from many other things, a renowned Aurobindonian scholar and nativist, when I came to Baroda for my master's in 93-95, he asked me to try my hands at writing in Marathi. I had never studied Marathi or Marathi literature formally. This means my competence in this language was minimal when I started out with. My spelling and grammar was atrocious, and probably it is tolerable but not good enough even today. Marathi as a literary language is an acquired language for me. It's not a language that I grew up in. So there are some of my Gujarati friends who write excellent Marathi poetry because they are grown up in Bombay. Some of very important poets of my generation are Gujarati, writing in Marathi. However, I recognize that Marathi was the language which was best suited for my expression. I could do a lot of things which I could not with English, though my language of education has been English. There are many things you can't do with English because it's not the language of everyday expression. We don't have that access to the registers of English language which a native speaker would have. I have been writing in both Marathi and English since then. However, I confronted, negotiated the tensions and contradictions within conditions of our Indian modernity, namely linguistic schizophrenia and subtractive bilingualism. Multilingualism, creative writing in two languages, translation, world literature have been inseparable parts of my personality, and they are reflected in my own academic life as a teacher, researcher, and mentor for research. So what do we even mean by linguistic schizophrenia? We heard about Rajaram Mohan Roy in the morning, and he said that when Rajaram Mohan Roy was with his English friends, he was the most Indian person in the room. But when he was with his Indian friends, he was the most English person in the room. So this is a kind of split in the personality that happens because of English. And it so happens that we need English and yet we don't want it. English is the language which we never oppose almost. Even the Bharatiya Bhasha Pariwar framework was written in English. Just saying. Constitution of India written in English. So what is this strange place of English in India where you desire it? At the same time, you know that it's the language of our former oppression and colonialism. That it came to us as the language of slavery. So this paradoxical, contradictory place of English is what Braj Kachru points out as being linguistic schizophrenia. And that's a very important idea here. So on the one hand, there is a resistance to linguistic imperialism, the term I think which came up in the morning in the question. So you know that it's imperialistic language. Uh, but there is also an uncontrollable desire to acquire that language. So you see there are more spoken English classes. You don't find any spoken Gujarati or spoken Hindi classes anywhere. So there is an uncontrollable desire. This is characteristic not only of English language but modernity, as the language stands for, in relation to the West. And Rajaram Mohan Roy was famously demanding that English and liberal Western education be taught instead of Sanskrit in Indian colleges. But I'm going to talk about another very important but less discussed figure or not discussed figure. He is Vishnu Shastri Chiplunker. He is the fountainhead of aggressive nationalism in the Western region. That is Bombay, largely. Bombay Presidency, as it was called in those days. And his writings were first to get banned very often. He describes, he makes a comparison between English and Persian. And he says that Persian is like the dress. It just changes the dress. You can change your costume. But English captures our brains. You cannot change, you can change your clothes, but you cannot change your brains. Gandhi changed his clothes. But even then, his English education and the English knowledge that he had acquired stayed with him for the rest of his life. He brought out a journal in English. In spite of being a militant anti-English campaigner, Gandhi himself brought out a journal in English. That is what is meant by linguistic schizophrenia here. Chiplunker goes out to say that English is milk of tigress, Vaghiniche doodh. That we have to use that to empower ourselves against the fight against colonialism. But he also said that unlike Persian, which is not real threat to Indians, English would be a greater threat because it captured and conquered nothing less than Indian mind. Such contradictory attitudes towards English reflect the contradictory natures of Indians towards modernity and Western society, where one needs the elements of Western culture like the ideas of democracy, Western liberalism, nation, progress, fashion, cultural forms like Hollywood films, web series. On the other hand, we see Western culture and English as a byproduct of colonial history. So this contradiction is one of the important features of our modernity, which all of us have to go through. The second crisis is the crisis of subtractive bilingualism. And what do we mean by that? When a Japanese person learns English, or when a German person learns English, it's an add-on language. It expands that person's repertoire for linguistic abilities. A German person is not ashamed of German language when she acquires English. A Chinese person is not ashamed of Chinese when she starts learning English. Or a Japanese person learns English and there's a great demand for English globally, but they don't think their languages or cultures are inferior to be ashamed of. And that is called subtractive bilingualism. So the Chinese acquisition of English is called the additive kind of bilingualism, where you get one language plus one language. You have two languages. But once you take English on board, you see that your Gujarati goes for a toss. Your ability to use Gujarati or Hindi starts to decline. And such a situation is described by Lambert as subtractive bilingualism. And that very often happens with migrants. So when my parents come to Gujarat, you are in a situation where Marathi is a minority language and Gujarati is the language. So there is a tendency for us to lose our Marathi. Most of the Maharashtrians living in Gujarat from centuries speak Gujarati, which is heavily inflected by, speak Marathi, which is heavily inflected by Gujarati, kind of pidgin or Creole Marathi. You start losing out your resources. So this happens in migrant situations. But when you acquire English, you don't migrate physically. You get alienated from your society and language at your doorstep. You become an alien just by going into an English space. And I have seen many places where they charge fines in English medium school. If you speak good in vernaculars, then they charge fines. Right? That is an extreme example, but there is a pressure that you should acquire English so that your personality improves. People who don't use English don't have personalities. That seems to be an assumption, or intelligence for that matter. And that bilingualism is called subtractive bilingualism, something that we have in India. So it is an asymmetrical bilingual situation, where the acquisition of an elite and powerful language like English results in depletion and deprivation. And this has not stopped after independence. In fact, it has increased several folds. There is always a constant demand to acquire English. And very often as a writer, I'm puzzled when students say, I want to learn English. What do you even mean by English? A language is nothing less than cognitive and epistemological mechanism. Once you start, in order to acquire English, your thinking has to be in English. And your worldview and your ethics and your lifestyle, all that is affected when you start acquiring English. So what exactly do you want? It's not just a verbal thing. As a student of literature, I can say that language is much more than just words. It shapes our worldview, shapes our values, shapes our moods and feelings as well. So how did I negotiate this? Then the first thing that I took up was to translate. So translation was kind of bridging whatever damage that subtractive bilingual situation had done to me as a person. I could reconnect to Marathi and Gujarati through translation. It became a way to negotiate this situation. So translation and research in comparative Indian literature are the profound ways of making intimate ties across languages, cultures, historical periods, and across regions. They are the strategies of relocating oneself in the complex cultural linguistic topography of Indian society. So literary translation for me is a genre of creative writing, nothing less than that, and cultural research in general, which has allowed me to creatively grapple and negotiate with these complex questions. So when I started doing my research in translation studies, it was just an upcoming area in 95. And the topic that I wanted to work on would hardly be accepted even in my university where I did my master's from, that is MS University. So thank God for VNSGU. Right. Where there was a greater space to accept what is called vernaculars as a viable area of research. Because there was some rigidity at that point in MS University of Baroda. That how can you take up a project of translating Gujarati poetry into English at all? And very interestingly, this was the university where I studied some of the most fierce debates over English, which was part of our curriculum. and Bhavin is with me, and we remember that the politics and ideology of teaching English was a paper that still persists today. And we were exposed to all the politics of English language, beginning with Macaulay and Rajaram Mohan Roy till today. Uh, and this is the place that would lay great emphasis on literary theory. So in the 80s onward, there was a great influx of Western literary theory into Indian academia. You had theories like post-structuralism, deconstruction, structuralism, uh, different versions of feminism, and post-colonial studies. These were just flowing into Indian academia, again from outside. So this is where I started doing my research under Professor Daksha Vamdat, who could give me full freedom to explore and express myself as a researcher. And this was my topic. So after my master's, I was considering various areas for my specialization for PhD program, and I started researching translation seriously. And I started by translating my Akho, and I could find that I could not do justice to his chappas, which are very terse couplets, whose effectiveness is very often very difficult to render into English. So that's how I reached Narsi Mehta. This was also again a suggestion given to me by my teacher, Professor Ganesh Devi. And Narsi Mehta was called Adi Kavi of Gujarat, and he was compared to Chaucer. However, Chaucer is not part of living English culture the way Narsi Mehta is. So if you go to Garbas, then you will hear Narsi Mehta's Garba. He's still part of living performative traditions, religious beliefs, and religious practices and institutions. So unlike Chaucer, Narsi Mehta is still alive, culturally I'm saying. So there's a great difference when you start using Western categories to analyze Indian literary histories. So Narsi Mehta is not Chaucer or Gujarati, because Chaucer is dead. He has to be taught only in schools and colleges. And people have stopped taking up English literature as their subjects in England. In India, we have 200 students applying for FYBA programs. So I often ask them that how many people do you think would be accepting Gujarati in London for doing their bachelor's? And that is the asymmetry that you have to keep in mind. Okay, so that was my discovery. So translation of Narsi Mehta has lived with me as a kind of experience. And I discovered more Narsi Mehta as a complex phenomena where you have plenty of erotic poetry which they never tell you about, strangely about with Narsi Mehta. We are taught that he is a kind of Gandhian poet, right? Which he is not. He is more in the tradition of Shrungar Bhakti and Ughado Shrungar, as Uma Shankar Joshi said. So this explicit sexuality, and I think this question came up teaching Shakuntal in the morning. It contains obscenity. So what is obscenity to Victorian taste was a part of everyday artistic performance in India. The one aspect, if you want to decolonize ourselves, we should start by decolonizing the Victorian within us. Because we still are so much Victorians. So this is my early book where I collected most of my reflections on translation study. So then I moved over to other texts in translation where I looked at many Gujarati contemporary writers like Manilal Desai, Ravji Patel, Ghulam Mohammad Sheikh, Sitanshu, Yashish Chandra, Chinu Modi, Dilip Jhaveri, Rajendra Patel. These are the contemporary poets. Many of them are from Baroda. And I translated fiction as well into English. So why was I translating? It's because I wanted to make a link between creative expression in English and creative expression in Indian languages. The only way to bridge it is through translation. I also translated more than 30 contemporary Marathi poets for this collection called Live Update, an anthology of recent Marathi poetry. So translation was something that was as inevitable as breathing, a phrase that T.S. Eliot uses for criticism. Criticism is something that is as inevitable as breathing. Translation is something that is as inevitable as breathing for us Indians. And yet, if you look at it, our own understanding of translation is still very much colonized. Our layman's understanding of translation today is still, it's about some sort of equivalence. So most of the questions that are heard to me after a translation session is that how will you translate jalebi? How will you translate this? So then I ask them, what is the equivalent of jalebi in Gujarati? There is none. So if there are no equivalents in the same language, how can you find equivalence in another language? So translation was never about equivalences. But we are still holding on to that very outdated idea of translation. So translation allowed me to explore the culture that I was born and brought up, Gujarati, and also the roots, my own Marathi heritage. Uh, and translating many marginal Gujarati writers gave me an access to other Gujarats, which are not very often represented on mainstream Gujarati literary culture, and other Maharashtras. The dialects, marginal communities, even marginal sexualities, marginal geographies is something that I could access because of my activity of translation. So most of the texts which I translated from Gujarati don't fit into the stereotypical understanding of who a Gujarati person is outside Gujarat as well, and within Gujarat as well. For example, Bhupen Ketkar, a major painter from Baroda, right? And his expression, a very comic, humorous and witty way of talking about homosexuality is his forte. But how many Gujarati readers have read Bhupen Ketkar, for example? And these were some of the problems that I faced while I wanted to publish my translation. And this led me to think about that there is no one English. There can be multiplicity of Englishes, as Braj Kachru has talked about. However, the hegemonic model of English today is still the native speaker variety, which is strange because our English is very different from the English and also American English. But then, what is the definition of good Indian English is something that we have not really thought through. So I'm just going to skip over some of the things. And I'm going to talk, if I have 5-10 minutes more, talk about the framework that I've been using to research. So my life as a writer, researcher and teacher are around the same problems that I've been going around culturally. It's not that my life is different and my life as a researcher is different and my life as a writer is different. They are all intertwined and extensions of one another. So what am I trying to do as a researcher and as a teacher is I'm trying to overcome or try to remedy subtractive bilingualism through some ways. And one of it is to research Indian languages and literatures, translate them. These are the ways through which I could address the terrible effects of subtractive bilingualism that we as post-colonial Indians have to face all the time. So I introduced a paper called Comparative Literature and Comparative Indian Literature courses at our department, probably in 2011, and they are ongoing till now. So what is this framework of comparative Indian literature? And probably this will have some resonance with what was being said in the morning about unity and diversity paradigm that we often use to think about when we think of Indian literatures. Cecil Kumar Das and Amir Dev are trying to argue that we should look beyond this binary of unity and diversity, because that itself can be a limiting way to look at it. And so they talk about something called comparative Indian literatures, which is very different from comparative literatures. In fact, it's according to them, comparative literature in the West is between national literatures. But when I am comparing Bangla with Gujarati or Bangla with Marathi, I am not comparing between nations. I am comparing within a framework of nation, but still I am comparing very different cultural histories. And for that you need a framework which they call comparative Indian literature. One of the basic assumptions of comparative Indian literature is Shishir Kumar Das's idea of terra firma, or the ground on which you stand as a researcher. And a German person researches German literature. Japanese person researches Japanese literature. They may go into studying Gujarati as well. Some of the best researchers in Marathi that I know are Americans. But it is after their understanding and exploration of their own literature. It's not based on their ignorance of their own cultures and literatures and traditions. But when we set out to study English literature, then it happens that we don't know anything about our own literary traditions, and we are trying to understand what Reformation is or what Restoration was. And that's why it turns into an MCQ affair. Right? You have to memorize it. Because it doesn't matter to us what is Reformation or what is Restoration, or how long did Civil War last. Because these are not important questions for us here. We know what happened in 1857. Because that's part of our identity and cultural memory. But when we study other cultures, then the problem is how do we study it? Shishir Kumar Das insists that literature is always an expression of people and society. It belongs collectively to the people who speak that language. So when Shakespeare is writing, he is writing for the people who speak English. And we as Indians, when we study it very superficially. Because we are not really into its history. We are not even into our own history, that's a different thing. But terra firma means a Japanese person starts doing research from Japanese culture. But Indians, how do they start their research or study of literature? So terra firma, according to Shishir Kumar Das, is your mother tongue or the language that you are living, part of your living life. You may be born a Gujarati but living in Rajasthan, then you're brought up in Rajasthan, then Rajasthan will become your terra firma. So there has to be a base in India, Indian language, to do research in India. That is what is one of the basic axioms of comparative Indian literatures. And Amiya Dev speaks about using a framework called interliterary framework, which seeks to overcome this dialectic of unity and diversity that seems to go on from Nehru's times. It's still there in Bhasha Pariwar, is nothing new. Slogan of Sahitya Academy is Indian literature is one, it speaks in different languages. That's what Radhakrishnan said. So if it is said so early, then what is new in this framework? Right? So some of the questions are not really new. They have been thought through, and Amiya Dev tries to go beyond this unity diversity and talk about idea of interliterariness, a theory which is very fully fleshed out, but so because of lack of time, I'm not going to talk about it, or maybe I will talk and stop. It basically means that the idea of influence that we carry. For example, when we say Bollywood is heavily influenced by Hollywood, what we are saying that the influencer is superior and the influence is culturally inferior. What we are, whenever we use the concept of influence, there is a kind of bias towards the, which puts the influencer on the pedestal. But we don't say that Shakespeare was influenced by Seneca, and so Shakespeare is inferior to Seneca. Nobody reads Seneca. I don't know if they read him in Italian at all or not. But he was influenced by Seneca. English sonnet is influenced from Petrarch. But we don't cut their marks for that. So there are double standards at work. When we borrow something from other cultures, we are seen as less creative, less intelligent, passive, while the culture from where we take is supposed to be superior. So this problem with influence studies is what a theorist named Dionys Durizin is trying to dismiss by using the idea of interliterariness. What he says is it's like making a cup of tea. Now tea is not from Indian civilization, right? And idea of putting milk in it is not where the tea is coming from. They don't do it. It's an Indian innovation. Sugar. So when we combine this, it's a process of making tea. So we don't say that tea is influenced by Western society. It's a process. And we have made it our own. We have creatively innovated within it. We don't say cricket is a colonial byproduct anymore. We may say it in academic circles, but that is irrelevant. In the same way, we should abandon the ideas of influence and look at process-based models of interliterariness, is what Amir Dev is trying to say. So when I wrote this history of Marathi literature, I drew upon these ideas to write history of Marathi literature, to show that Marathi literature is not just Marathi. It is also connected to Persian. It is also connected to Sanskrit. It is also connected to Bangla. It's also connected to Hindustani. It is also connected to Kannada. It is also connected to English. So when I show that Marathi literature is not just Marathi, I am using comparative Indian literature's framework to show that. And that is the whole idea of writing that history of Marathi literature. So because I think I've run out of time, I'm trying to stop. And I will be very happy to respond to queries and questions from all of you. And I hope to learn from you as well. So thank you very much for having me here.
Interesting session, isn't it? Yes. Sir started this session by saying it is going to be a post-lunch session, but I am sure the impact of his words was more than the impact of the food which we took. So thank you very much, sir. Uh, Professor Ketkar's talk offered a thoughtful and timely intervention in contemporary literary uh, and translation studies. His comparative perspective across Indian literature highlighted the complex negotiations between languages, power, and creativity. It contributed meaningfully to the ongoing debates on multilingualism, to the ongoing on ethics and future of comparative literary studies in India. And while he was talking, especially when he used two phrases, one is linguistic schizophrenia and subtractive bilingualism. In fact, I am also victim of it.
All of us are.
My on paper I am Gujarati. My mother tongue is Marathi. But I cannot write mother tongue as Marathi because it is surname is Shah.
Okay.
That's the problem. Father tongue and mother tongue. Yeah, so father tongue and mother tongue are different. With my granny, I talk in Konkani, and she is no more, unfortunately, and I can comprehend little bit of Kannada as well.
Okay.
So, Jack of all and master of none. So, in fact, very interesting session. I'm sure you people have many questions to ask. So,
Not many, couple.
yes.
Who will start?
Okay, since we'll come back to Sarchu later on. I'm sure he has questions. So, yeah. Professor Prajapati.
Yeah, actually, I am very happy and I missed you only for 2 or 3 minutes in my.
वो स्पीकर वो रिकॉर्डिंग कर रहा है.
So, I actually missed you only for 1 or 2 minutes, but I was very happy to listen to you because I also work in the same area. Actually, as a translator, what I want to know from you, because you are a creative poet, you are a translator, you are a teacher. So when you translate a poem, say for example written by someone in Gujarati, and because you yourself are also a poet, do you think the poet in you become heavier over the translator if you come across some linguistic problems of the source language text that you are translating? Because I have faced that problem, though I don't write much actually creatively. Yeah.
That's an interesting question because creative writer in India is a translator anyway. And when you translate, say for example Narsi Mehta, then the question is, do I become more important than Narsi Mehta? Then it does. Why it does? Because I am the one who is making choices. Which text I am going to select, how I am going to translate it, what are the strategies I am going to use. So the text is produced by me, the translated text. Right. So translator itself, the subject of translator should be researched far more extensively in Indian context. You should have greater studies of major important translators, because translators are very often, for example, A.K. Ramanujan, very famously, and if I am allowed to be judgmental, then I find that his translations are far more fascinating than his own creative works. As if he comes out as himself when he is translating Sangam or when he is translating from Kannada. So it's your creative expression. So translation at the end of it is your own creative expression. So you select those texts which resonate with you as a writer. Right, so that choice that comes from the translator. At the same time, texts select you. Some texts compel you to translate if you are translating. So very often text becomes more overriding than me when they always take over. So that also is happening, and that's why it's a very difficult thing to answer. But I would definitely say it's more of me than Narsi Mehta.
In one of the interviews of Girish Karnad that I read earlier, he wrote in Kannada, then he himself translated his own plays. So he faced this problem. That is what he accepted actually. That whatever the weaknesses that I had in the original dramas, when I translated, I was tempted to overcome them in my translation.
Yeah. So there is a very famous case of Rabindranath Tagore, and his Gitanjali is not Bangla Gitanjali. Right? So he took liberties which he thought he was entitled as a poet. So there's an essay called Translation as Perjury by Sujit Mukherjee. So when the question of politics of self-translation is entirely different domain of research. And I being one of the self-translators, because nobody else wants to translate my stuff, so why not me? As the first reader.
But sometimes, sir, the problem is if you are a self-translator, you can take liberty. But if you translate someone else's poem and if you take some liberty, then they are offended.
Yeah.
That is what I have faced very often.
People are offended even with Tagore's translation of Gitanjali. Means he's not giving you Gitanjali. He's giving you his new work called Gitanjali in English, where he has cut down 3 or 4 of his poems and made a 5th one. So these are all dicey issues. For example, A.K. Ramanujan translates Chenna Mallika Arjuna as Lord of Lord White's Jasmine. Lord White's Jasmine, or Lord of the Meeting Rivers, Kudal Sangama, Dev. So these are creative liberties, but they bring out, they are more effective in my view as poems because of that.
Yes, any other questions? Yeah.
So when we are not taking a particular text, we are having our own language translating them. So every language has its culture attached with it. So when we are translating that, so sometimes it happens that we dilute the culture also. So how to maintain that cultural value with language?
What happens here is that we are working with inaccurate explanation of what translation is. When you say that Gujarati culture vanishes or dissolves or gets diluted or lost when you translate into English, you are looking at translation as a form of equivalence. Now, instead of equivalence, if you look at it as a question of interpretation, so you are, when you it's an English translation of Gujarati culture rather than an equivalent of it. Then I think there is a greater space to work with translation. And also, why you translate matters. If your intention is to retain the cultural flavor, then your strategies will likewise reflect that. But if your intention is to create another work in English which reaches out to more people, right? So very famously, they make a distinction between domestication and foreignization. So when you want to adapt a text for a different audience, then you may want to make it conform more to the reader's culture. So it depends on your intention and purpose, what is called scopus of translation, the whole telos behind it. That decides your strategies. And these are both the ways of translating.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I have a question about the whole idea of Bhasha Pariwar. In Pariwar, you know that it has its own structure also. And in Pariwar again, um, the important thing is that you're head of the Pariwar also, head of the family. So when we have Indian Bhasha Parivar or whatever it is, so some, as Devi has also said, Professor Devi, that we have Margate tradition and Desi tradition. So literature belonging to the Margate tradition, Sanskritic tradition, sometimes dominates as the head of the family. And other basic traditions are, they are the children of the whole, that particular family, father. So it has its own binarism also. The idea of Bhasha Parivar deconstructs the very idea itself, and it creates binarism. For example, we have Valmiki's Ramayana, and I teach at present Kokana Ramayana, which is Dharma Valmiki is translated, or it is an oral tradition, but it also creates this kind of binarism. So I teach Kokana Ramayana in the tribe. My classroom is dominated by the tribal students. All of them are tribal. So when they read Kokana Ramayana, they feel, I think, some more understanding they have of this particular, it is itself a culture, mythology, etc. So they feel some more understanding of this, relatability or whatever it is. And so on the other hand, the other Ramayana in Sanskrit, it has its own, it creates the power structures. It has its own authenticity. And on the other hand, the Kokana Ramayana doesn't have that kind of authenticity. So within the hello. So the idea is that within the Parivar, one language has its own authenticity, historically, accepted authenticity, and other language in its literature doesn't have that much authenticity. The idea of authenticity also uh, It takes you to the Indian history also. It becomes more historical, real. Okay.
Yeah.
It has its own truth also, as compared to other traditions, which do not have.
Hmm.
So just highlight this idea.
Yeah, thank you for that very important question. I find this metaphor of Pariwar very fascinating, personally. Vasudeva Kutumbakam, Pariwar. And why I like about it, what I like about it is Mahabharata is about Pariwar. Ramayana is about Pariwar. Whose son should inherit Ayodhya? So Parivar is a harmonious space is something that we seem to assume, but it's the site of great conflict, as our great epics teach us. So in Bhagavad Gita, very famously, the very first sloka of Bhagavad Gita, Dhritarashtra says, Mamaka Pandavas Chaiva. There are Mamakas and then there are Pandavas in a Parivar. So Parivar is not a symmetrical, transparent, harmonious space. So there are always, as you say, hierarchies, asymmetries that we should address if we are going to use the idea of Parivar, which cannot show under the carpet just because we don't like them. So there are, even in a Parivar, I talk of Gujarati and Marathi and their famous term is Bhagini Bhasha. Now, if you look at two sisters in a family, nothing can be more different from each other. Huh?
Age.
so, so when we are using this trope of Parivar, we should also be attentive to the fact that the Parivar is not such a cozy, nice place always. It's a place where we are trying to run away from most of the time. Right? And so the whole romanticization of Parivar that we are doing uh, is, I think, can be undone by just looking at the two civilizational narratives, namely Ramayana and Mahabharata. And you see that there is a bias towards Bharat and there is a bias against Kaushalya's son. So, Parivar does not mean there is no bias. So, asymmetries and hierarchies and marginalizations are the histories that we have to be attentive to, even when we are looking at the framework of Parivar. So, yes, there are these asymmetries, and we cannot escape it even if we want to. We can't sustain it for long. The idealized fantasies image of family. In fact, Freud's theory is called family drama. Daddy, mommy, and me. The Oedipal triangle. Right? So that's the site of conflict. So we should, I think, de-romanticize the idea of Parivar a bit, to be realistic.
Conclude now. Do we have any last question? Some observations. Yes. Because I have initiated, so I will have the conclusion. So I agree with Professor Ketkar regarding his comments. But as you have created the dichotomy of linguistic imperialism, so English is one of the Indian languages. So that we have to change that orientation. We accepted English from the imperial masters, but we accepted in such a way that it became a part and parcel of our existence. It has become our official language. All the official transactions are done in English, and so what we try to imbibe that the linguistic features of the language. And as Professor Bhosle was trying to say, this Parivar is the Parivar of 1369 Indian languages and dialects, as it has been done in the census, our census of India, that is 2011 census. So just one number less than 1370. So our eighth schedule has accepted only 22 languages. So obviously we have many terms there. So we have minority languages and we have major language.
And we have official language, we have non-official language, we have gadget language and non-gadget language. And so native languages and non-native languages. But irrespective of those, so we are trying to bring out a common kind of vocabulary. So lexical item and syntactical items and the tribal languages, the Dalit languages, all the languages which were not getting space in the mainstream, now they will claim their space. The researchers should come from their own communities and how to preserve the language that is going to die out. So dying languages, dead languages. So we have to revive them. That attempt has been made in this exercise. So 2 volumes when I went through, the first volume is mentioning about the theoretical principles as Professor Bhosle outlined. Some of the experts from the linguistics department, they have done the research. The second volume is having around 42 or some essays by 42 experts from different universities. So those essays are related to our all Indian languages, mostly those who have contributed. And so it's just the beginning. The exercise has begun by the Minister of Education, and it will reach to the ground reality. Many research scholars will come out and they will have their own projects on different languages, even dialects, and how to codify them, how to put them into a system. And so how to, for example, one scholar from Sambalpur University, he joined as a faculty from the tribal community. So he is now trying to codify his own language, so Santali language, and he's collecting the tribal literature and he's translating them into English. And this is an exercise by an individual. So many individuals will join. So this Bharatiya Bhasha Pariwar, the Utsav that we are celebrating, has nothing to do with our binaries. So it is simply a kind of collection of languages, and each language will be at par. That nobody should underestimate one language. That binary of inferiority or superiority as a matter of culture study is not here. So it's simply an exercise from an academic perspective. We all have to contribute. This is an eye-opening activity. So this is the beginning. So for example, we brought this event to Surat, so just to make us aware. And we can have projects in translation, we have projects in applied linguistics and language study. So many research scholars can come in future with their own projects. With these remarks, I will wind up. Thank you.
No, I totally welcome this initiative of multilingualism and providing level playing field for languages. I completely welcome this initiative. So,
sorry. So I welcome this initiative, but I was just trying to say that the metaphor and metaphors can't take us very far, especially the metaphor of family. And I said that even within a family there have been instances. For instance, Mamaka and Pandava is a binary, right? And in Mahabharata, and our civilizational texts themselves speak of a lot of violence and language. So we cannot show many things under the carpet in our desire to kind of romanticize. But as you said, providing level playing field to languages, accepting them on board, going beyond English, for example, to other Indian languages, multilinguality beyond English, is something that I find very positive and productive.
So thank you very much, Professor Ketkar. It was an honest pleasure listening to you and learn from you. So we'll conclude this session now, and the next session is paper presentation session. Yeah, thank you.
thank you.
So Dr. Amit Prajapati will take over.